JT Crowley is talking books. On the show, you'll hear from emerging talent and seasoned veterans from around the world.
Hello, I'm JT Crowley. I'm the host of Talking Books show on Web Talk Radio. And today I've got on my show for a new author, Jane McCabe from Los Angeles in California about her book Revelation, the single story of divine prophecy to Abram and his descendants, the Jews, Christians, and Muslims. It's a book that tells the story of prophecy as one narrative, acknowledging Muhammad as a prophet in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and at the same time equating stories from the Quran with their biblical translations. It's a big book, everybody, and Jane is a very, very talented lady. She not only writes, but she does pictures, she does all sorts of things. She's very, very talented, everybody. But yes, Jane McCabe from Los Angeles. This is going to be so good, everybody. And I was just so delightful to actually be looking at her book. So let's get Jane on so she can brief us all about herself, who she is, why the book, and what's the story behind the story. Jane, hello. Come and join me on the show.
Hello, John. It's a pleasure. It's a delight to be interviewed by you. And I'm looking forward to our conversation. Anyway, you mentioned several things. The first, so refresh me. What's the next thing you'd like me to say?
So, everybody, before we go into the book, let's ask Jane to tell us who she is, what she does, because as I said, she's not just a writer. She taught in schools, she's paintings, she's an artist. She's done so much in her life. So Jane, give us a little brief insight as to your background before we actually open the book. Who are you?
I was born and raised in Montana, and I didn't exactly stay there. I've lived in a number of different places in the United States. I've always been an artist. I've always loved writing and painting, both of them. And I seem like I have natural talent as a painter. That's the way it seemed. And I had to earn my stripes as a writer. I had to learn how to edit and how to write. But it's kind of like I got the painting from my mother and the writing from my father. Yeah. And
really?
But neither of those occupations are exactly, you don't make much money on them. I graduated from the University of Washington with a BA in art, and then I got a master's degree in painting from the San Francisco Art Institute. However, I always earned my money teaching. So I taught my entire working life. I taught all kinds of schools, all kinds of subjects, a great range of ages of students. I always enjoyed teaching because I enjoy explaining things to people. And that's it. I've retired from teaching, but I still paint and I still do some writing. And I wrote this book, Revelation. It's a bit of an oddity given my background, but after I graduated from the Art Institute, I went on a trip to the Middle East with my mother, and it was what do you say? It changed my life. And it prompted me. I've been, I was raised a Lutheran, and but I always considered that I was, not exactly in the fold because of being an artist. But I decided to go to Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. And while I was there, towards the end of my 3 years there, studying theology, I would make a joke about it. Oh, I'm studying God. But towards the end of it, there was so much to read, there was so much to learn that they didn't really have much time for comparative religion. But there was one class, and we were asked to choose a religion and I guess what would be a very short study of it and write something about it. I chose Islam. I couldn't have been more frustrated. I felt like I just couldn't understand it. I had prejudices against it, and I just, I just couldn't get a handle on it. Well, when I was a child, if I couldn't solve a problem, I'd throw my pencil across the room. It was the same.
I think we all
It was
did
the same kind of thing. So I kept studying Islam. And as I studied it more and more, I became more intrigued and, kind of fell in love with it. I
Okay.
read about 6 biographies of Muhammad because that was an easy entree. And then I read a lot of the history. When I went to New York City, because I have my Quran here, but I don't need to open it. In 1996, I was in a Barnes and Nobles,
I know, and you got a book, didn't you? And you thought it
and
was
I bought a
precious.
Quran.
I know.
Yeah,
I'm going to cover that off later, everybody.
yeah.
So,
Anyway, I studied it. It's
yeah.
like the scholar in me studied it verse by verse, surah by surah, and it was a delight. I enjoyed the study very much. I didn't pay too much attention to the verses that urge violence. I was aware of them, but I didn't dwell on them. There was so much that was of interest to me that by the time I finished my study, I wanted to kind of I wanted to write the history of Revelation because, let me see, because in a way, it was an exploration for my own benefit. So I wanted to see. There's some key things here. One of the key things is that many people don't believe in revelation, like with a capital R. In other words, the revelation uh, um, that has come to us through Scripture. They think it's they don't believe that it's actual. In other words, that it's actual that God has spoken through prophets to mankind.
Okay.
I believe, excuse me, I believe it is actual, but that's a key thing because accepting revelation as having come from God is key to my study. I'll
Okay.
let you talk, John.
So let's open this book, everybody. Now, Jane, you've set your book out in chronological order. We have an introduction, which is very, very good, everybody, because it really does set the tone for the book. We've got 7 chapters plus a conclusion, as well as an appendum at the back of the book. Now, I want to start with the introduction, for this is you, Jane, setting your stall up. You give us an insight as to the story behind the story, and I believe the concept of the book goes back to your time in Brooklyn, New York, in June 2000. You immediately, and for me, capture the reader's attention by some meaty conversations here and forthright theories. And I also get the impression this doctrinal path of yours hasn't always been easy. So, would you care to tell the audience, the listeners, what is in this introduction?
Well, in the introduction, I tell how it is I came to write the book. And, I include things like they built a new mosque in New York City. And so I visited it. And that was very interesting to me because they segregated the women, and they were very polite. They came and said, let me know that I wasn't dressed quite appropriately. And then they gave me a scarf to put over my head, and I was led up to where the women were sitting, and there was a screen in front. And so it was quite an adventure. I had a few Muslim friends, and I drove them crazy asking questions about, and I think that I start from a position of naivete, that I'm like a child that needs to know things, but I'm ignorant in certain ways. And then as I learned more and more, I was fascinated. And one of the things that fascinated me is as I started to study the Quran, I think I'm veering off, but I'll just go ahead and finish this. As I was studying the Quran, I started making notations about biblical references. In other words, references for things in the Bible. Like, for example, they have a whole surah on the Virgin Mary. And they mention Moses a great deal in the Quran. And they mention all of the prophets. A lot of the things that are, especially in the Old Testament, are also mentioned in the Quran. Interesting. The thing that what got my attention was that there were some stories about Moses in the Quran that were not in the Bible. And I said, wow, this is amazing, because it was like there must be a source informing the Quran of things that are not, at least didn't make it into the into the Old Testament. And there were things like that. I'll stop there.
It's a very, very powerful introduction, everybody. There's a lot in it. Like all of the book, there's a lot in this book. It's not a bedtime read. It was never written to be a bedtime read. It's there to make you think. But what I do say is that just keep an open mind. That's all I'm going to say. Don't judge. Just keep an open mind. It's fascinating, believe you me. So let's go to the first chapter, Jane, which you head up from the beginning of time to the time of Abraham, about 2000 BC. You open up talking about Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 to 31, the story of evolution and creation. You mention verses 38 of the 50th surah in the Quran. You touch upon primitive prototypes, dinosaurs, insects developed before mammals, and that God's creation plan was over a considerable period of time, not just what the Genesis says, 6 days,
Yeah.
and God rested on the seventh day. I firmly believe, when I look at your book, and I haven't done a bit of study myself, is that each one of these days was probably an awful lot of years.
Yes, I'd
And,
say.
God, was at this for a long time. And, you talk about trials and errors. You talk about the Neanderthals. You talk about coming of agriculture, early civilization, the genius of monotheism, the Sumerians, the Egyptians, and a whole plethora of other subjects here. It really is, an opening, powerful chapter. So, what do you want the reader to get from this chapter?
What was I I'm gonna I think what I was trying to do is and it was starting from the creation of the world to Abraham. I think what I was trying to do is I was trying to establish that there is this thread through history, that it's not just a fluke, and I was trying to verify my argument by, but if I were to write it again, I probably would shave down chapter 1 because it gets a little heavy, I think. And it gets a little, I wouldn't be surprised if some people would stop reading with chapter 1. And they said, oh, if this is what it's like through the whole thing, excuse me. Anyway, but that my intent was to give myself verification, if you follow what I mean.
I do. And so when you look at everybody, yes, it talks about the Neanderthals, the dinosaurs, it's all done in chronological order. And as I said, it's believed that each day, the creation story is
Oh,
not
yeah.
just one day. It is a series of years.
Millions of years.
I think
Yeah.
it's 50, one day is 50,000 years, something like that.
Yeah. We could, yeah.
That's where the 50 comes in your book. That's where the 50th comes in. So yes, there's a lot in here. Jane, packs a good punch in the opening scenes here, and she's going to make you start to think. And as it says, keep an open mind. Just keep
Yeah.
an open mind.
Thank
Don't
you.
be prejudgmental. Now, chapter 2, Jane. Revelation to the ancient Hebrews from Abraham to the birth of Jesus from about 2000 BC to AD 1. That's how you title the second chapter. And I note in this chapter you talk about a definition of revelation, the process of revelation, the call and response, consequences, the promise, and the test of a time prophet of God. The Old Testament, God's revelation to the people of Israel before Moses, Leviticus, a kingdom divided, Elijah, plus again a whole plethora, a whole host of very, very interesting facts, artifacts, and historical information here, everybody. So, what again do you want the reader to grasp from this chapter?
Well, if I've got the reader's confidence, or even if I don't, but they're still interested in what I have to say or what I'm writing, um, the revelation as being discussed starts with Abraham. He's the father, but he's the father of all three monotheistic religions. In other words, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And the story, of course, I love the story. It's a fascinating story, the story of Abraham, who had migrated into the area which is today Palestine or Israel. And as you like, I mean, I won't go there. In any case, Abraham's wife, Sarah, was barren. And so, but God kept telling Abraham that he would give him as many descendants as the grains of sand in the desert, which is millions and millions of descendants. How can this be? His wife has never had a child. So Sarah herself encourages Abraham to go into her handmaiden Hagar, and he does. And Hagar conceives and gives birth to Ishmael. After that, there's this story of the angels visiting Abraham and telling Abraham that, well, Sarah will have her own child. Sarah is listening to this and she laughs and she says, at this age, she probably is about 100 now. At this age, I should have pleasure, which is sort of a nice thing to say. But anyway, she gives birth to Ishmael. Trouble brews. I'm trying to be fast about this. Trouble brews between Hagar and Sarah, because Hagar is flaunting the fact that now she has this young, strapping, gorgeous young son, and Sarah has none. So Sarah forces Abraham to remove Sarah and Ishmael from their encampment. And Abraham's not happy about it, but he does it. He does her bidding. Now, there's something that's kind of unusual. According to the scripture, Abraham takes Sarah and Ishmael to the area in Saudi Arabia, which is now Mecca, and that area surrounding Mecca. Well, that's an awful long trek. I can't remember. I looked it up, but it was, in some ways it's sort of preposterous that he would take her that far, but that's the story. So I won't argue. So Ishmael then becomes sort of like you could call Ishmael the father of the Muslims because of, anyway. And Sarah conceives and gives birth to Isaac. And then the Jewish people are the prodigy of Isaac as it moves through the Old Testament. I mean, there's much more to the story because it's like, what we love in today's entertainment is we love all the series. Well, this would be like about a series of, 200 episodes as it moves through time. Anyway, this is a key factor that all three religions call Abraham their father.
They do. And yes, the trip from Israel to Saudi Arabia would have been a very long trip in those days.
Yeah, it would.
It's an awful long time.
Yeah.
Now, chapter 3, Revelation to Jesus and the early Christians from AD 1 to AD 320. Now, I found this was interesting, maybe because I could relate to it more. The headings that can be found here, we've got Messianic hopes, we've got Philo, we've got the New Testament, we've got Jesus' lease fits the prophet pattern. I thought, that's interesting. And you focus very much on Matthew's gospel to talk about a whole range of teachings. So why Matthew's gospel as opposed to the others? And your section under the burning question is very thought-provoking. So why Matthew's gospel here, not the others? And the burning question. Isn't this fascinating, what you're talking about here?
I think that I refer to Matthew's gospel because it's more extensive than Mark, and because it has the Beatitudes in it, and because it's John's gospel is not part of what they call the parallel gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the stories parallel each other. And so you're going to find versions of the same stories in all three gospels, whereas John kind of goes off on his own. So he's not part of that. I think I find Matthew's gospel, it's chronological and it's accessible. Luke's gospel has the wonderful story of the birth of Jesus. That's not in Matthew's. It's kind of given short shrift. And in Mark, he just gives the lineage and he's on. So he doesn't really tell too much about the birth of Jesus. And of course, all we Christians love the story of the nativity and the birth of Jesus and Christmas and all of that. So anyway, they're all four gospels are unique in their own way. Did I miss a question?
No, that's fine. And the burning question, Jesus wasn't quite seen as, how shall I say, an ideal prophet.
Well, that isn't, I don't think isn't the burning question, at least the burning question for me is Muhammad a true prophet? Now, of course, Muslims would like to, scorn me for saying such a thing, such an outrageous thing. But, I had this question in my heart even before I think I can't remember. I get my own chronology mixed up. But I had this question in my heart for quite a while. And that, I believe that's what I refer to as the burning question. It's the burning question in me because uh, I didn't know how to answer it at first.
There you go. Now, we're only briefly skimming these chapters, everybody, because when you go into them, they're quite lengthy, and there's lots and lots of doctrinal theories there, lots of scriptural texts there from the Quran, and referring back to the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's a lot going on here. And so you can get a sense that we're just skimming over it because the whole idea of this podcast is just to give a brief insight.
Yes.
To know more, well, I've got an answer for you. Go and buy the book. She
Thank you.
likes that one, everybody. She likes that. Now, Jane, chapter 4, the conversion of Constantine and the Nicene Council, AD 320 to AD 570. Interesting times, I thought. Now, I'm not going to lead the audience on this chapter here because I normally lead the audience, give them a bit of an insight as to what's going to be revealed in this chapter. I'm not going to do that because I want Jane to do it. So, Jane, what is in this chapter and why is it there?
Oh, it's there because it's kind of key to my thinking. I remember when I was at the seminary and I was reading about the conversion of Constantine, which brought Christianity, into the modern world, and made it the religion with the numbers of people that it had, and really gave it a tremendous boost. But what happened is that there was a great deal of art. It's a great story, and Karen Armstrong really does justice to it in her History of God. Uh, it's great fun in a way. There was a lot of argument going on about the nature of Jesus. And, some people saying he's God, some people saying he's not God. And anyway, and like the way she describes it, it was like, people could get into fistfights about this. They were so keyed up about it. Now you had two basic camps. One camp was more thinking that Jesus was God, and the other camp, I'm simplifying it. The Arians said, no, Jesus is not God. He's a prophet. He has all these powers. They didn't question the Son of God because there's something that gets confused in all of this, and that's because sometimes reality and symbolism aren't exactly the same things. And anyway, so Constantine was the emperor, and he had established himself in Constantinople, and the church had evolved. We're talking about the 4th century now. The church had evolved so that there were synods or groups of Christians that were led by if it were Catholic, it would be by a certain cardinal. And so Constantine pulled all these people together, and the whole idea was to deliberate the nature of Jesus. And they went at it, and they condemned the Arians. The Arians were the ones that said he's not God. And they came up with what is referred to as the Nicene Creed. And the Nicene Creed goes on and quite elaborate. Jesus is very God of very God, begotten, not made, of one being with the Father, and such. And so it's really lovely poetry. But I'm sitting there, a good seminarian student, and I'm outraged. Are you all right? You need some water?
Fine.
Okay. Anyway, so where am I? so anyway, I'm outraged because I say to myself, how can you decide the nature of Jesus by a vote?
Oh,
And to me, that was just uh, like a I just felt you couldn't do it. But nevertheless, the Nicene Creed has dominated the Christian um, idea of who Jesus is, and it basically says he's you come up. This is sort of like the birth of the idea of the Trinity,
hmm.
because that didn't, early church, they didn't have that idea that there was a Trinity. But now they decided that God was a threesome. It was God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Some people think it's Mary, but it's the Holy Spirit.
Hmm.
Those three make up God. And so the Trinity became one of the essential doctrines of the Christian church. It was and it is. It's still, when I go to church, we still say upon occasion the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed,
Apostles'
which
Creed. Yeah.
says the same thing, but in a little more simple way.
Yeah.
Anyway, but it's like a bedrock, that understanding of God. Anyway, so I saw the Nicene Creed as a key factor in my story of Revelation, and that's why I included it.
Hmm. I wondered why.
Oh,
Now
you
I
did?
found out. Now I've just
Yeah.
found
Oh,
out.
okay.
Right, okay, let's go to the next chapter, chapter 5, Revelation to Muhammad. Here I find you concentrating on the birth of Muhammad, the history behind Mecca. It's fascinating, that is. What Mecca and the Kaaba mean to Muslims, especially in the month of the Hajj. Ishmael's descendants, we've got the Bedouins, we've got the symbolism behind the stone. Muhammad's childhood is very, very fascinating here in this part of the book. The recitation of the clot, plus, various letters Muhammad wrote and some of his ventures. So in this period, this period in time, important to you personally, that's one of the questions I want to ask. Is this, period in your journey of faith important to you? This sort of period, is it important to how you, connect with your own faith? And hence the reason for talking about it in your book.
I love this chapter, um, because I love the story of Muhammad and his becoming a prophet. By the way, he didn't write anything because he was illiterate. He
Mm,
What he did, what by the time he was 40 years old, he had he had married, oh Lord, I have memory issues, so forgive me, this wonderful woman who was the owner of the caravans that he supervised. And but he was given to withdrawing to a cave to near Mecca for the purpose of meditation. And that was where he was seized by the throat by an angel and thrown against the wall, and the breath was taken out of him. And the order was that he's to recite. That's what he's told to do. And so he's given this recitation that I guess is so powerful that he remembers it just perfectly. I mean, you have to. And then when he goes back home, I think it's Kajia, his wife. He's very upset. He's trembling. He's sweating. She wraps him in blankets but she takes him to, which is sort of there's so much lore. It's like, it's like how we love George Washington cutting down the cherry tree. We don't know if he ever did cut down the cherry tree, but it's a story about to tell us how honest he is. Well, there's lots of that in Islam, but Katia takes him to actually a Christian, an elderly Christian man who's known for his ability to see, a seer, seer, and that man tells him that, tells him that he's indeed a very special person, and and that what he is hearing is, very valuable, and in fact, he endorses Muhammad. The story, I've read so many versions, but they were all kind of the same in their, oh, I don't know, in their reverence of Muhammad. And there's, the, oh gosh, I should have brought it. There's also books that compile the sayings of Muhammad. And those are not considered they're not part of the Quran. What the Quran is, it's a compilation of the recitations that Muhammad received. I was going to say supposedly received, but I'm going to say received from this experience when he would withdraw to the cave. And I can't even tell you how many revelations. I think there's over 100 surahs in the Quran. There's several surahs that are quite long, so that would be amazing that he could even remember that much. But they're early. As the Quran moves towards its end, the surahs get shorter and shorter, and the final surahs in the Quran have to do with the Day of Judgment. You see, we have big parallels between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And the Jews, they kind of go light on the final judgment day. But the Christians, of course, are like, very, very much, at least, I guess it's more the evangelicals, but the idea that there will be a final reckoning and judgment. Islam has the same thing. There will be a final reckoning and judgment of all people. So some of the things that it's like the similarities are reassuring, I guess I would say. The differences are disturbing.
Because in your book, yes, it does touch upon all the three religions,
Yeah.
Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. It touches on
Uh,
all of it. Because that's what it's linking it all up, everybody. So now the Quran, and because the next chapter is titled The Quran Part 1, Old Testament References. Then the following chapter after that is going to be the Quran, New Testament references, everybody. So we're going through the chronological order here. So let's go back to the Old Testament references in the Quran, part 1. And what you're saying here is very comprehensive. You talk about when you purchased the meaning of the glorious Quran. Here's the book that she bought, everybody, back in 1996. I said I'd bring it back. And you talk about the Holy Quran being a unique among the holy books of the world. And the Quran referring Jews and Christians as the people of the scripture. And then you talk about the grading of the prophets to increase. And then you talk about, the historians here who accept that over a period of time, maybe sometimes the stories have got elaborated or they've got distorted, from the time of the event to the time of actually being recorded. So, you've got, again, a lot of stories and facts and historical information here. Cain and Abel, Moses, Job, Saul, David, Solomon. You've got the lot in here. You've packed an awful big punch into this book.
you're refreshing me.
Yeah, that was the whole,
Yeah.
that's what I do. I look at the
Yeah.
book.
I
So,
just
the Quran, part one, the Old Testament.
I just am moved to tell this one story because I think it's so choice. This is a story about Moses that is not in the Old Testament. It's just in the Quran. Moses is journeying with an angel. They go a small distance, and my memory is not good. So if I don't tell this perfectly, so it's because my memory's not good. Anyway, they keep encountering various outrages, like the son of a couple dies, like a boat sinks, and every time they encounter another outrage, Moses says to the angel, you know, how can this be? This is terrible. And the angel usually says, well, here's the backstory. The reason that the son died is because if he had been allowed to live, he would have gone astray and brought his parents great sorrow. So there's always with whatever tragedy they encounter, there's always this backstory that the angel informs Moses about. And for some reason, that story just delights me. And I think that must be true. I mean, we don't know the backstories. Of course, you can only carry that so far because you can't find like I can't find a backstory behind all of the Palestinians that have been killed by Israel.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that's a different
anyway,
story. That's
there's
a different
there's
story,
these
everyone.
there's these nougats. That's what I call them. There's these little nougats that are in the Quran. There also are some things that are repeated that I think are wonderful. I'm like one of the things I love is on on Judgment Day, Allah will inform us according to how we differ. That's said about 3 times in the Quran. On the Judgment Day, Allah will inform us according to how we differ. So I don't worry that much about how we differ because I figure it's impossible to, you know, reconcile.
Okay, so and the last chapter we're going to go to is chapter 7, is the Quran part 2, New Testament references. And here you highlight Jesus in the Quran. Your scriptural texts from the Quran are from Surah 1 to 60. Jesus is granted 12 helpers. We've got Mary, we've got the crucifixion, you've got Jesus as a perfect Muslim. That's an interesting thought. Muhammad being sent to people of the scripture to inform them. Judgment Day, I think you've saved the best to last. So, what's the relevance of this chapter in the overriding context of your book?
Well, in both cases, the both the Old Testament chapter and the New Testament references chapter, um, I'm just I kind of like it was like picking fruit from a tree. I didn't, I just took certain things and discussed them. The surah on Mary is another example of things that are not in the New Testament. She's before a tree and she's hungry and I don't, I tell you the truth, I can't remember but it's like, um, I think that's what delighted me about the Quran. There, I also should say the surahs at the end of the Quran, they mostly deal with Judgment Day and oh, the things that are supposed to happen to non-believers. Oh my goodness, they're thrown into lakes of fire. their thirst will be unquenched. It's like they're really having a hard time, and those are very severe surahs, and they're of interest, but it's just they're kind of astounding, just how vicious they are. You better get your
Your act together. Yeah.
you better get your act together, because it's going to be
Absolutely.
bad if you don't.
Because I understand that Islam, yes, it's a faith, it's an important faith, but it's a way of life, really, isn't it?
Oh yes, oh yes,
It's a way of life.
yeah,
So let's have a look at the conclusion of your book. And here I find you talking about points of agreement, such as the sovereignty of God, God's attributes, the equation, judgment day, heaven and hell. And then you've got points of disagreement. The Trinitarian dispute, there's always going to be a dispute about that, the Trinity.
yeah.
Prophecy after Muhammad. Muhammad as the paraclete.
That's kind of a wild.
Ooh, that's a wild card thrown at the very
Yeah,
end. Yes. So for me, this is the conclusion. This is you, I suppose, basically summarizing, to help the reader ascertain as to what you are trying to tell them. Am I right?
yeah. I feel that the conclusions are the weakest part of the book, but and also when I wrote the book, I had this idea that it would be possible to reconcile Islam and Christianity and Judaism. I thought it would be possible, and that was part of why I wrote the book. And now years have passed, because I first published it in 2000. So now it's 25 years later. And there was a period when, I was so enamored of Islam, I thought about converting. There's just something pure about Islam, which is complicated in Christianity. And I liked that purity. I was drawn to it. But I didn't do it. I stayed a Christian mostly because I was raised a Christian. My family, they've strayed now. They're heathens, some of them. Anyway, they've strayed. And, but I decided, it was a kind of like an intellectual decision, maybe, but I said, I'll stay, with my tradition. And so I stayed with Christianity. The years have passed. I belong to a church. My thinking has evolved. And I now understand that let me say this, the principal controversy between Islam and Christianity is the concept of the Trinity. The Muslims, it's in the Quran more than once in the Quran. It's like sometimes the Quran is very almost clumsy. They say cease three exclamation point. It's not in just one place, it's in several places. What they mean by that is they want Christians to stop this idea that Jesus is God and he's part of the Trinity. To them, that idea is an anathema. Well, as I thought about it more and more, I thought, well, maybe they have a point here. Maybe Christians have exaggerated the place of Jesus in the scheme of things, and it's possible that they have. But nevertheless, I cannot see Christians ever I mean, as long as we have our religions, the Trinity is actually the heart of Christianity. It has been ever since the time of Constantine, and it still is. And if you look carefully at the liturgy and the hymns and all the, I love singing hymns, and you see this thread is one of the main, I don't know, ideas that unites Christians. So when I wrote the book, I thought maybe a reconciliation was possible. Now I don't think so. I've changed my thinking, but I think rapprochement is possible. I think that, and we don't know. I mean, there is this mystery that is not answered in my book. There is this mystery, like why would God, send Muhammad after Jesus? Wasn't Jesus sufficient? But it may be because the Arabs, the culture of the Arabs, with their nomadic culture and their life being as severe as it is, needed their own prophet. That may be, or it's even possible because when Muhammad receives his surahs, they use the voice we. They often address him, and the speaker is referring to itself as we. Well, who are we? Are they a group of angels? So there's some
Okay.
stones unturned here.
Oh,
Maybe
lots of stones
reason.
unturned.
What?
Lots of stones unturned in your
Yes,
book.
really.
That's what it's about. It's a thought-provoking book, everybody. And it was published in 2020. That's when it was put out. But I understand that Jane she's been, working on it since 2000 and putting it together. And it's
Oh,
fascinating.
thank you.
So
I had it in my
who,
mind to write. I had it in my mind to write a history of the relationship, particularly between Christians and Muslims through the centuries, but I didn't do it. Maybe I realized I was biting off way more than I could chew.
that'd be a very big book, everybody.
Yeah, it'd be very big.
Very, very, very big. So who do you want to see reading your book?
If one is a dyed in the wool, Christian who thinks that the world was created in 7 days, like it says in Genesis, or is extremely hostile to the whole concept of Islam, they probably wouldn't even want to read my book. They would see it as heresy or something.
Okay. So
But
it's
people
for
are
people who've got an open
curious.
mind.
What?
It's for people who've got an open mind,
Yes.
who have a religious understanding, but this book will be for people who, as I said, have got a religious understanding, but want to learn a little bit more, and because they've got an open mind about the different religions, the great religions of the world. This is what the book is about, and this is for you. We've only just skimmed across it, everybody. And if you want to know more, then go and get the book, and you can go and get it on Amazon. And you can click the sites on the written introduction that goes with this podcast. You can get it there. And I also believe you can get it from Barnes and Noble and other places in the US, can't they? Yes. Thank you very, very much for coming on my show.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure, and I'm just so thrilled to be able to talk about my book like this. So thank you very, very much.
Jane McCabe, everybody, from Los Angeles in the United States of America. I'm JT Crowley. Thanks for listening. Wherever in the world, the next time, stay safe.